within kind of like a few hours, people were replying, commenting, and saying, oh, they had this, it was casual ableism, they had this, they had this, they had this. And I suddenly thought, actually, this probably should be something bigger, like it shouldn't just be about me. And so I never set out for it to be anything. I never set out for it to be what it is today.
Laura, welcome to Disabled and Proud. How are you today?
Really great, thank you, and thank you for having me. Really excited to join the podcast today.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation because you are the founder of Casual Ableism, which is one of my favourite Instagram accounts. And whilst I find it absolutely hilarious, I also find it very jarring and very truthful. And I think there's something to be said in that, because whilst it is quite funny, it's also quite tragic as well. And I think sometimes we have to take a bit of tragedy with humour. So I'm so looking forward to hearing all about that journey. The first question that I ask absolutely every single guest is, how do you refer to your disability?
So I refer to myself as I'm disabled, and I've always been proud to say that. I think because for me, I was born with muscular dystrophy, but we didn't know until I was 8 years old. So I spent the first 7.5 years of my life knowing I was different, knowing that something was kind of wrong with me, that I wasn't the same as everybody else, but I didn't know why. And I had no explanation for why am I like, why can't I run? Why do I always fall over? Why am I always ill? So I think that when I kind of finally found out that, oh, I have muscular dystrophy, that's why. I think I've always been proud to embrace that, because it was always the explanation I needed to explain to people when I was at school. If teachers were saying, oh, why can't you run? Why don't you do sports? Why are you always ill? I never had any reasons. I think to be able to embrace that diagnosis, obviously I know that diagnosis can be quite a sad thing, but at the same time it can be quite powerful because you try to have a reason for why is this happening. Yeah. So yeah, I'm definitely proud to say I'm disabled and have a physical disability. So my lived experience comes from physical disability and chronic pain, chronic fatigue. And yeah, I'm always proud to say that I'm disabled.
I love what you said about how it gave you answers and it was almost like a light bulb moment, and you're like, oh my gosh, like now it makes sense. And whereas before, when you didn't have answers, you were like you said, like why can't I run? And actually I love that so much, because it's suddenly like, oh my god, like 2 and 2 does make 4, and it's not like because I can't, or like I don't want to, or that there's something that's really weird going on in my body. Like it's just, I've got this thing, it's muscular dystrophy, it is what it is, but oh my god, now everything else makes so much more sense. And I think that's such a lovely way to look at things, because I think you're right what you said about diagnosis. Sometimes it can be incredibly scary, and there's a grief period, and there's so much that comes along with that. But actually just embracing it and being like, yes, like now I understand and I can wear this like as a proud badge on my sleeve is incredible.
Definitely, especially as a child, you're taught not to answer back to teachers, and you're not meant to, kind of stand there and not argue, but you're meant to kind of debate it or say, but actually just let me explain. You can't do that as a child. And so I think that was what was so empowering. It's funny, I would say it actually, like, this is a real thing. I'm not just being lazy. I'm not just like not trying. I'm not just trying to avoid sports. I'm genuinely, this is what it is, and this is what I can do. I can still do these things, take me longer, or I just need a bit of adjustments in place to be able to do that. And I think that was what was so great. And obviously there is a grief to it, and obviously it wasn't easy. But I think because it made sense of 7.5 years of kind of like, why is this happening? It was just this kind of like, okay, well, the future now looks different than we thought it was going to look. Now that we know this is happening, but at least we have an explanation. At least we can kind of do something with that. I think all the time that you have unanswered questions and things that don't make sense, people go through years and years of the diagnosis journey for whatever type of health condition, that then you kind of think, well, but without an actual answer to what it is, there's no kind of plan. You can't plan ahead because you don't know what it is. So as soon as you have that answer, like, okay, this isn't great, in the future it's going to be different than what we imagined when I was born, but at least we now know this is the game plan, this is what can be done, and just embrace it and kind of use, I've always, as a family, I've always said that you use the negative as a positive. So with advocacy and any way of doing that something, that's why, casual ableism, I wanted to use my negative experiences to kind of help raise awareness of ableism, and then also other people have also using their experiences through submitting casual ableism to then help educate people and everything. So that's the way I look at it anyway.
Oh, I love that outlook so much, and I just think there's so much to be said for how you view it. And actually, if we're talking about muscular dystrophy, for those who don't know, can you give like a really like simplistic, like minor explanation of what it is? Because in the way that I know of it is that it's wastage of muscle.
Yes.
And I think like that, but that's my very, very basic knowledge of muscular dystrophy. And I was wondering if you were able to just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, of course. So muscular dystrophy is the umbrella name for, and there are
Mm-hmm.
so many different. I don't know exactly how many there are. But there are lots of different types of muscular dystrophy, and most people know of Duchenne, which affects boys, and that's the kind of popular, most known strain of muscular dystrophy. Sorry, because of my muscular dystrophy, it's very hard to say the word muscular dystrophy, which is why I'm slightly
Yeah.
the muscle wasting.
It's that ironic, isn't it?
I
Like
know, it's
super
really,
ironic.
yeah, it could have been a simpler word. Anyway, so yeah, it is. You're right. It's the muscle wasting. Basically, the simple terms is that when you're born, your muscles aren't kind of created in the same way as other people's. There's like a genetic
Mm-hmm.
mutation or some form that they kind of don't build the same way. And the way that it explained to me when I was 8 was that, for example,
Mm-hmm.
someone else's muscles would look like rib steak, really expensive steak, with like
Wow.
minimal marbling, proper like quality, nice bit of fat around the edge, but really pure.
Yeah.
And someone with muscle dystrophy, their muscles could look like kind of minced sausage meat, kind of
Oh
scrambled.
wow.
And that's kind of like an idea of like how it's not formed properly. That was just like the simplistic way I was explaining when I was 8. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, so it's a muscle wasting, and every single strain is different. It affects people very differently. So my lived experience is of a very rare strain called minor cardiomyopathy, which is
Mm-hmm.
only a few people in the country with it, and the world's very, very
Wow.
rare. It was only discovered in 1970 something, so it's really, 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 really rare,
Oh
and there's
wow.
no
Super rare.
information about it. So yeah, muscle wasting, and as I said, it affects everybody differently, whether it's with heart conditions or respiratory or scoliosis, but just the general muscle wasting, and mine affects my core and my lungs. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, so just the general term is it's a wasting of the muscles, and they never rebuild. You can do physio, you can do things, but it never gets back to what it was. Once you lose that, you can't rebuild it. Um, that's like a general. I'm not an
Mm-hmm.
expert, so I don't know the exact technical things. That's just how it is for me. It's progressive, and for a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
it can be stable for lots of years, and then it can progress or it can develop later on in life, depending on the strain. And that's kind of,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So it's different for everybody, and there's no one. Even someone with the same strain as me, I know of 3 other people, and none of them are the same as me, even though it's the same strain. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how it's like sort of people say, oh well, you have that disease, so you're the same as my friend, or you should be able to do that because someone else has the same as you. That's the whole thing. Is that it's so different for everybody else, and everyone's lived experience is different, and it's going to be different of the way it progresses or manifests, or how it affects them, and even in how they choose to talk about it or choose to identify as well.
Yeah. And I think what like isn't it insane when we think about disability, because we all kind of, if you're not in the disabled community, or if you're, you're just learning, or you're just on your journey, is that we very much believe that it's, disability is one thing, and then you kind of get under the hood of disability and it's definitely not one size fit all. And then all of a sudden, like, you go into loads of different disabilities, and equally with that, it's never just one size fits all either. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. Like, you're someone that has a genetic mutation, and it was only discovered in what, 1970 something?
Something I think, I don't quote me on that, but it was kind of not that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, which is just absolutely bananas when you think about it. Like, we're still learning so much about disability, and actually, like, I just love your outlook on it, because you're like, yeah, like, it makes so much sense for my life, and actually I'm going to wear that on my sleeve. And I think that's a really beautiful way to live, which is like, it's amazing. But I was wondering, when it came to you, as you were saying, so you got diagnosed when you were around 8. And
Yes.
what was it that prompted you and your family to like investigate further?
Ballet.
Oh
I was
wow.
no, it was, I think because I grew up without any other siblings, so my mum never had anything to
Hmm.
compare me to. I think if someone grows up with siblings of different ages, then you kind of have a comparison of, hang on a minute, that child isn't doing what that child did at that stage, or that child, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
is behind that child who's younger, for example. So I never had that comparison, and obviously we just have thought, well, I'm just a bit weaker, I'm just a bit slower at kind of like being, my strength isn't very good, or it's just how I am. That was it. It was just like, it's just how she is, and that's fine. We'll adapt towards it. And no one ever, I think it was also because it's progressive, it wasn't that obvious. And so it wasn't until I was in year three and we're doing like ballet
Yeah.
exams and jumping. I couldn't jump. I can never be able to jump. So we had to do part of our ballet exam was having to jump off the ground, like a little ballet move. And
Yeah.
suddenly it was like, this child can't jump. And it was a ballet
Mm.
teacher who then talked to my like form teacher and said something not quite right here. And then they spoke to my mum about it, and then hospital, kind of tests and everything. I'm not sure how long it took. That it kind of goes black after a while. I remember being in ballet class, and then I remember being in hospital, and it's kind of the rest of it's kind of black of the like time scale. So yeah, it was ballet class, and suddenly that was the reason they kind of. So I think finally someone took the time to think, hang on a minute, that's not right, because for so many years it had been, come and hurry up, why are you being slow, why are you doing this, why are you doing that, and finally someone thought,
Mm.
actually there is something wrong here, and we need to kind of help her by finding out what's wrong, not just, ugh, she's so annoying she can't run. It always takes one person to actually kind of think outside the box and to actually want to kind of, I guess, help. And obviously that was probably quite a big thing for them to have to say, have to point that out to my mum. But yeah, so that was ballet class. It was where it all started, in the process of finding out what was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. It is you're so right. It is amazing. It only takes one person to actually flag something up and be like, "Hey, I think maybe something isn't like as it should be here, or something different is going on." And actually, like, I love the fact that you kind of this all came about because of ballet,
Yeah.
because like what a like beautiful story. Love that you were, you were being active, and sometimes it just wasn't working for you. Like you said, you couldn't jump, and it wasn't because you were being lazy, it was because you
No.
just couldn't jump. But also because there were people who are involved in that story who aren't direct relations to you. There are
Yeah.
people who actually were like, maybe something different is going on, and actually if we can help out, we can," which just goes to show that actually good people are out there, because there's a lot of people are horrible to disabled people and whatever, but actually people do want to help, and it's about finding the people that do.
Yeah, and I think that also it's interesting when you think about education and how you can be very overlooked in education. And
Yeah.
it's kind of half of me questions why previous teachers didn't stop to think, rather than just kind of like
Mm.
telling me I was a nuisance, or kind of like getting annoyed. Why they didn't stop to think, how many? I mean, they receive hundreds of children. Why did they not think, hang on a minute, this one is not kind of the same, and there must be a reason behind it. Let's try and work with her and the family to find out why. So in that respect, there's a bit of frustration, I guess, of that why
Mm.
that was never discussed sooner. It took kind of 7 years. It took, from nursery into, primary school. And then finally it was in a ballet class that someone actually thought, hang on a minute. It wasn't a PE teacher.
Yeah.
It was, and I think that's also what you were saying about how I was being active. And that was the whole thing, that I was always gave 110% in everything, and I still do. So even though I couldn't
Mm.
run, even though I wasn't like the most athletically competent person, I was quite sporty. I wanted to participate, and I never wanted to get
Mm.
out of it. So it was always hurtful to me as a child to be told that I was being lazy or was being a nuisance, because I so badly wanted to participate. Like in sports day, I really wanted to do
Yeah.
the races, and kind of the embarrassment of not being able to, with everybody watching. I was just a bit like, okay, this is like not fair, because I'm not one of the lazy children. I want to be able to run and to win races. I want to be
Yeah.
able to be that. So of course, when it was ballet class, I wanted to do ballet, and that's actually what's quite
Mm.
funny, was that despite the clear kind of restrictions I had, the clear inability to kind of jump, for example, or run,
Yeah.
I was still there doing it. I was still giving it 110%, even though clearly it wasn't that easy for me. Which I think is quite funny when you
Yeah.
think about it.
I just I part of my heart breaks when you're like, I wanted to be that kid that was running, and like, for my own embarrassment, but then equally I'm like, but you're someone who really embraces your disability, and like, would that part of you exist if you hadn't felt that, like, oh, I really want to do this, but actually like it doesn't really work out for me that well. And I was wondering, after diagnosis for you, what was the rest of your schooling career like? Like, was your school super adaptive and accommodating, or were there struggles there?
I think you had an episode a while ago with Kieran, and he said there could be a whole episode on educational system for disabled children, and I completely
Oh, I know.
wholeheartedly, completely gonna say that again. I completely agree with that, and we could go on about this forever. I mean, I think they adjusted up to a point, but it
Mm,
wasn't great. And the school I was at was on a hill, so there were things that they couldn't avoid. They couldn't take away the hill for me, and they couldn't take away the huge
yeah.
steps. You actually had to go down to get to lunch and that sort of thing. And I think that up to that point, they did do what they could, and there were teachers who were more flexible than others in adapting. And I think the problem
Mm,
I would say was, of course, I was there for a year and a bit before I was diagnosed, so I was just a normal child in the class, and then suddenly I go to hospital, I come back, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, we have a disabled child in our class." So I was the same person in the school, but suddenly I had a
mm,
disability, and they had to kind of like, I guess, adapt to that. And then maybe if it had been a different, like starting a new school and going, this child disabled, here she is, she's new here, then it might have been easier, if that makes sense,
mm.
because they would have kind of
Yeah.
known that going into it. And yeah, and I was the only disabled child in the school, so that didn't help either. They didn't really have the measures in place to understand disability or anything like that. So no, it wasn't great. Um, and yeah, not great. And there's always even if the school's very understanding and helpful, there's always things that you're going to face as a disabled child, and keeping up with your peers,
Yeah.
missing school due to ill health, and there's always those things no matter what. There's always going to be those things that you can't really do anything about because there's the sort of things that happen and things that you experience as a disabled child, regardless of what type of health condition, what type of disability, what sort of disability you have. It's all kind of like it's just part of it. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I honestly think that all schools, regardless of where they are and if they're, if they're funded or not, do not categorically know how to handle disabled children, regardless of what the disability is. Like, it genuinely does not matter what the disability is. Quite often, schools are completely clueless.
yeah,
And I think what you said about going back to school is really interesting. The fact that because you had been there for a year already, it was almost like there was the pre-diagnosis you who was
definitely.
like quote unquote non-disabled, and then suddenly there was a post-diagnosis you who was a disabled child, and almost because they had the you that was pre-disability, they couldn't always understand as to why you needed accommodations, because before you had this diagnosis you were somewhat able to do them, but actually it was incredibly difficult and not a pleasant experience
Yeah,
for you to do something
or
like walking
beforehand,
downstairs.
I just adapted because I had no kind of reason to ask for accommodations. And of course, afterwards, after diagnosis, I went back and it was like, well, actually, the OTs and whoever else, the team, would have gone to them and said, actually, this needs to be in place. So does this, so does this. And they were used to me just adapting and trying to manage because that's what I had to do.
Mm,
I always adapted because that was the only thing I could do, even though I didn't know why I had to do it. I just naturally, that's how
yeah.
I grew up because that was how it was. So that's also the case of they were used to me finding the ways around the access or my disability, and because after they were suddenly like they had to then do those things for it. Um, I think you're right. They don't have the education, and obviously this was 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
I would hope that now things have changed in whatever type of school, whatever type of educational setting. Hopefully things now have changed as there's more disability awareness, there's more education, and hopefully teachers are more informed when they're just by being exposed to more disability because hopefully now there is that more awareness in society, especially with social media and all the different platforms that weren't there 20 years ago when I was, going through it. Which I just have to hope that that is the case for other children now that are going through kind of things that we went through when we were their age.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, the scholastic system in and of itself can just do with like a whole facelift, really. But here
Yeah.
we are. Interestingly, though, I want to talk all about casual ableism and like your ideas behind it. How did it get started? What was your driving force behind starting casual ableism?
So my driving force behind starting Cash Ableism was ableism,
Yeah.
funnily enough. And so it's kind of a long story, but I've been advocating for disability since I was diagnosed at 8, all for so many years. And for
Mm-hmm.
a while, I just took a step back because I found it quite draining, always kind of having to feel like I was fighting. I think anyone can understand this. You always feel like you're fighting a losing
Yeah.
battle sometimes. So I kind of took a step back. I focused on uni and on myself a little bit more. And then I was just finishing art school, a graphic designer, and I had had some experience at the art school. And in previous years, I just sort of had never done anything about because they weren't obviously that obviously ableism or discrimination. They were subtle, they were casual,
Mm-hmm.
and I had these experiences, and I never
Yeah.
did anything about them because I didn't want to cause any issues for myself. I didn't want to keep going and saying this happened, this isn't right. We just want to kind of like sail through and just kind of be under the radar a bit. You don't always want to have to be bringing things to attention and being that disabled person, which people can
Mm-hmm.
you know interpret you as, even if you're not. Um, and so I had all these feelings. I was awake one night. I was in pain. I was really annoyed at these things that had happened. I'd never done anything about. Like I should have gone to the head of the department and said, "This teacher, this happened to this teacher. It wasn't okay." I should have like just done something about it, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking like I need to do something with this kind of like frustration and this feeling inside me. I need to do something with it. And I had seen other things on social media for other issues where people had like opened up kind of like accounts just to post about experiences they'd had about a range of different things, not disability related, but just about a range of things. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that. Like, I'm a graphic designer. It can be a kind of graphic design social project of accessible
Mm-hmm.
design and advocacy mixed together, and two passions, advocacy and design, and making sure it's accessible and just kind of just do it for myself as a way to get things out. It doesn't have to reach anybody. It's just for me to do something with the kind of the feelings that I'm feeling about these experiences. And I
Yeah.
don't think I ever actually posted any of my own submissions because I did a couple of posts of like, what is ableism? What is casual ableism? And within kind of like a few hours, people were replying and commenting and saying, oh, they had this, it was casual ableism, they had this, they had this, they had this. And I suddenly thought, actually, this probably should be something bigger. Like, it shouldn't just be about me. So I just casually said to
Mm-hmm.
some people, well, do you want to post it on the account? Do you want it to be posted? And it just went from there. And I don't think I didn't even like one thing on my own. I never actually posted the kind of 5 things that I had like, intended to post. And so I never set out for it to be anything. I never set out for it to be what it is today. And, it just started from this one experience at art school that had just got me so frustrated and so kind of hurt. And I think the concept of casual ableism, obviously a lot of things that are posted aren't that casual, like very obvious. But it was just that kind of the concept of let's raise awareness of things that people don't think or know are ableist or discriminatory. They think it's fine. But because we don't say anything or because they're so subtle or casual, they don't like know, so they don't know that they're doing it wrong. So I thought, well, casual ableism, because it's that concept, and hopefully we can raise awareness of these casual, subtle things like those comments of, oh, you're too young to be disabled, or how fast does your wheelchair go? Those sort of things which seem like they're
Yeah.
jokes and light-hearted, but the more you get them and the more you have to smile through them, it's ableism and it's casual ableism. And that's just how the whole thing started. I started like opening up my DMs to submissions and kept taking on submissions hundreds and hundreds. And I refined the accessibility to make sure it was far more accessible with alt text and camel case
Yeah.
captions or hashtags, making sure that it wasn't ableist in itself. And it just went from there. I
Mm-hmm.
never imagined that we'd be here now, nearly kind of over 3 years later, with 10,000 followers, and I'm just so grateful to everybody who's ever submitted and followed and liked and commented, because it wouldn't be what it is without everyone who's put their faith in me as sort of anonymous person online wanting to like use experiences to raise awareness and also to kind of show people that they're not alone in what they're experiencing, because that's also really important. Is you can get so you think it's just you, or you think that no one else is going through this, but actually when you look down the account and you see the different range of disabilities and range of health conditions, and then you think, actually, wait, it's not just me, and I'm not alone. Even if you haven't experienced that one comment, it's still kind of like, wow, other people are going through this as well. It's not just me, which is really important, I
Yeah.
think.
I love that because essentially you're creating a community where sometimes people feel like they don't have any, and that's really important. And I think also what you said about in art school you didn't necessarily challenge some people because you didn't want to be seen as that angry disabled person that
Yeah,
so often people are boxed into, because you're right, when disabled people do complain, people just think that we're angry about the fact that we're disabled, when actually 9 times out of 10 it's actually more about the fact that the world in itself is ableist and inaccessible. And I completely understand as to why you didn't challenge people, because we've all been there. You know, people who say that they consistently challenge people sometimes are lying, because it does get exhausting and it's tiring, and actually, you know, it can be super frustrating. But also what you said about it being super casual, sometimes it's not until after something's been said you then
really,
realize what someone has said was actually incredibly ableist. I had that experience earlier this year that actually really knocked me for six, because like you said, it was so casual, and it was almost like such a flippant comment, but actually I couldn't understand why it had made me so upset and so angry. And then I had to have a sit down with myself and be like, that's because it was so casual, it was so
yeah,
open, out in the air, but it's ableism. And that experience really jarred me for quite a while, because it like you said, like it was just so casual, and there was nothing that was like, if someone had heard the conversation and didn't really understand disability, they would have just thought that it was just like something that you just say, like.
mm,
But actually, upon reflection, it was actually really quite demeaning and demoralizing. And that, like that, hitting the nail on the head, that you're giving this space to people who have these interactions, and you're giving community because it's not always there. And like,
no,
isn't that amazing that you're able to be like, do you know what, I've created this space, submit your submissions in, I will do the graphic design because that's what I'm good at. You know, I'll make sure that it's accessible for everybody to read, but you're not alone. And in that, there is something so valuable, because you are never alone in disability, but it can be incredibly
yeah,
isolating
you
because your
can feel like you really
community,
are. Yeah,
yeah, because your community is not necessarily straight away your next door neighbor. It might be something that you have to search for, but actually what you've created is there. And that in and of itself is lovely.
well, I hope so, and I think that often, like even if you have supportive friends and family, and even if they kind of agree with or understand what you've experienced, it's still not the same as hearing it from someone else like yourself, or who has that first-hand experience. It's still not the same. And I think also, like what I was talking about, school and being younger, it's very hard to find that when you haven't got the freedom for social media or to travel and
Mm.
meet other people like you. So I think it's about social media is, obviously people say it has its downsides, but at the same time, the disability community on social media is just so incredible, and that everyone's there for each other. And I think it just shows that you're not alone. And even if you aren't in the same country, somebody, you can still connect and still have that understanding without having to say it. I mean, that's really important. And the fact that also, as you were saying about your experience, you didn't realize at the time, it was only until afterwards. And I think often, like, we're so used to hearing these things, we're so used to just kind of smiling through it, we're so used to going out and seeing, a step with no ramp, or any form of
Yeah.
inaccessibility. They were just like, okay, well, moving on, whatever, never mind.
Yeah,
And then it's like
exactly,
larger, like, oh, I'm so
exactly.
exhausted by this, or actually it's a big, because we're so used to it, just kind of take it as normal. And I think that's when it kind of hits you after a while, and you're like, actually, that's not normal. I shouldn't have to be okay with this. Like, I shouldn't have to just go, oh, well, never mind, I'll just go to a different bar because that one's got a step in it. Oh, well, never mind, because actually that's not okay. But we're so used to just kind of going, okay, moving on. Right, I mustn't dwell on it. I must just kind of carry on and try not to let it ruin an outing or an evening or whatever. And I think that's also
Yeah.
the whole thing of the casual side of things. If we're just so used to it being casual, like, yeah, it's fine, but actually, it's not.
Yeah. And I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said, I didn't want to be the angry disabled person that
Yeah,
complained, because it's such a nasty, nasty trope, and it's one that the media loves to portray, and it's
definitely.
something that's really difficult to, particularly as women or those who are femme presenting, if you are complaining and you also happen to be of a minority group, regardless of what said minority group is, you are
Yeah,
the angry minority person. So you are the angry disabled person, you are the angry gay person, you are the angry black person. Like, these are tropes that really, really target minority groups to make you feel smaller, and also to take the control away from you so that it's
definitely.
given to other people. And there is nothing worse than someone just turning around to you and saying you're just being an angry disabled
Yeah,
person, because at that point you almost want to be like, okay, well, here is an education as to why I'm an angry disabled person.
yeah.
Here are all the reasons as to why I am sat here and I'm annoyed about it. And if you find
PowerPoint
this
presentation.
uncomfortable, yeah, exactly, like, if you find this uncomfortable, then do something about it. But this is my lived experience, so I will be annoyed about it. And I think
Yeah,
there's so much to be said in that. There's so much to unpack in it. I'm pretty sure we could probably do like a whole another episode just
yeah.
about being angry disabled women, because it's a trope that gets played all the time.
Mhm. And I think also, like as I said earlier on about being in education, you can't necessarily, you're not in a position to counter anything, and that was obviously happened at art
Yeah.
school. And so, there's a level of respect there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
already I felt like I was asking for accommodations. I needed extra exams, and I was already felt like I was, obviously I had every right for those adjustments, but I kind of already felt like I was asking permission for stuff. I was asking for things, and there was already a sense in my class of people who thought that I was getting away with things for disability. I was using it as an excuse for,
Yeah.
that's another topic altogether. But so I think I just wanted to really keep a low profile and just not kind of like I was challenging an authority figure as well. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's also another thing. Is there are certain situations where you can counter it, you can stand up for yourself, and you can say, actually, that's not right, whether it's in a social setting, whether that's in, you're in a small place or anywhere. But then there are certain times, whether it's with family, whether it's in education or workplace, there's a certain spaces where it's just not as easy to stand up for yourself, or metaphorically, you know, or to kind of say, actually, hang on, can I just explain to you? Can I just? I don't want to like cause trouble. I want to say or explain to you why that wasn't okay. In this instance,
Mm-hmm.
it was used as a way of, they were doing a photo shoot up on the roof, and she had come into the room saying there were four of us in the room, and she said there were only three volunteers up on the roof, and there were four of us in the room, and everyone else, all the other members of the class were up there. And her reasoning for not including me was that it was too dangerous. But if it was too dangerous, then no one should have been up on the roof. And so that was the kind of thing, and obviously it wasn't even that casual, but it was just this, the way she framed it was for health and safety and for protecting, it's too dangerous for you. But the way she'd gone about it was she'd come into the classroom, and there were four of us, she'd only asked for three volunteers. And, I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, there wasn't the space to be able to say, like, can I just explain to you that actually it wouldn't have been dangerous for me up there, because wasn't going to stand on the edge of the wall and fall over. Like, I wasn't going to be any danger to myself or anyone else. But also,
Mm-hmm.
just explained actually that I felt it was exclusion and it was discrimination, and that felt made me feel really isolated. But there wasn't, I didn't feel I could do that because, the teacher thing, and just didn't want to make a scene. And that's the whole thing of these spaces where sometimes you can say these things, sometimes you can't. I think that's sort of, you just get to know. I think you learn over the years of when to pick your battles and when not to. And you shouldn't kind of have to, but at the same time, I could have sensed that this was one that I needed to let go. And then later on start casual ableism and start this whole thing, which actually, thank you to that teacher, because this has been great. What's come of it, and the positive that's come from
Mm-hmm.
that negative situation has actually been really amazing. So in a way, thank you for that experience, because look where we are now. But
I think what you said about all of a sudden you became a health and safety hazard is an experience that far too many disabled people have had. Is that you are stopped from doing something because immediately people are scared, and you do become a health and safety hazard, and it's something that's really specific to scholastic buildings.
Yeah, and they
Immediately, as
decide
soon
for
as
you as well. They decide for you that you're going to be at risk or at danger, or of danger to someone else or to a situation, or you're going to be a health and safety kind of like responsibility for them. They decide that rather than saying this is happening, whether it's a school trip, whether it's some sort of activity or some sort of event at school, they decide for you rather than having a discussion. This is going to happen. This is what's involved. Would love you to be involved. What can we do to make you be able to be involved, or what can we do to make it low risk? Because obviously there might be a risk to it. I think that's the another key thing is how you approach these situations, and that's not just in education; it's anywhere with disabled people. When you want to have them in, have disabled people involved and represented, it's all about how do you approach it rather than deciding on our behalf. You need to actually have us with the conversation in the first place. All right, how can we make this work? Because it should be accessible for every single person, every student, every person who's here. And that's a thing that is done more, but it's still not done always
enough.
enough.
I think that is very true. You're taking away any power from the disabled person as soon as you decide for them. Regardless of what you're deciding, if you don't include that disabled person, then it's pointless and it's futile, because you're not actually understanding what part and parcel of the problem is. But moving away from school affairs,
Yes.
I wondered if you had a piece of advice for a younger version of you.
Oh, that's tricky. I think my main thing would be to do with with being identity of being disabled and feeling very different from everyone around me. I think that would be my biggest advice would be around that sort of like topic. I'm not sure what it would be exactly. I think it would probably be just I think kind of like just hang in there because you will meet people who accept you for who you are or and don't care that you're disabled. Then you will find those people that really do not care at all and it's completely irrelevant to them that you using mobility aid and or you're just different. I think that would be the biggest thing because it does feel. I think when you're lacking that sort of support, you're lacking even seeing representation on TV and in the media. You can feel like it's never going to happen, and that you are so different, and there's only one of you. Everyone else is normal, but except you, and that's really really hard when you're younger, especially when growing up is difficult anyway. Especially being a female teenager or teenager in general, it can be really difficult with identity and body image. And I think so that would be my biggest thing, which is kind of hang in there. Just it will get better. Just hang in there, and there will be developments in representation in the media. There will be people on TV who look like you or who have the same sort of experiences as you, and accessibility will get better. And you will find people that are going to not care if you have to phone a restaurant first to check if it's got a ramp or not. People aren't going to mind. They're not going to be an inconvenience to people. And the people that don't accept you for who you are, they're not worth it. And it's better to have a few people who accept you for who you are and who don't care than try and be part of a bigger kind of group of people who don't accept you. To have a small circle of friends who really embrace it and they just don't care. I think that's sort of like a really important message. And that even if, you don't have any people who understand or lived experience literally physically with you, you will find through social media, you will find people who are disabled, who have different lived experiences, who you can relate to and who are kind of also kind of alongside you and advocating for change and for better access.
I love that. I think that hang in there is actually such a good piece of advice for like anybody going through any form of hardship, because we could all do with that advice every now and then. Just hang in there because things will get better. And I love what you said about you will find friends who accept you for who you are and who won't worry about whether or not you've got to ring a restaurant or if you have to change the day that you're hanging out,
Yeah,
or they might not even have the same lived experience as you, but they're going to understand you in a different way, and that might not come from school because your people might not be there. And equally, that is absolutely fine. Like, your people might not be at school, they might be friends that you make through social media or through work or through activism. And actually, like, amazing. I couldn't love that more. Like, hang in there, you're gonna be fine. It just
Yeah,
doesn't feel like it right now.
yeah. And also I think the other bit of advice would probably be that like it's okay to feel like it's a lot. Like it's okay to feel
Mm,
like, wow, this is actually quite a lot to do. Like it's okay to have those moments where you don't feel proud to be disabled, or you don't feel like it's kind of, oh, it's fine, I'll just get on with it. It's okay to have those moments. I think that it's that, we're kind of sometimes expected to always be fine, so we're not inconveniencing anybody else.
yeah,
But I think it is really important also just to let yourself feel. If you need to have, a day or two where you just feel like actually this kind of sucks, that's okay too, because there's nothing worse than bottling it up and then not like accepting it. Because disability is hard. That's all, obviously we can be proud and we can say that, it's fine. But actually it's okay to say it's hard. It's okay to say that we face these things on a day-to-day basis of ableism, discrimination, or bad health, and that's completely fine as well. I think that's another thing would just be to kind of let yourself feel what you feel, because it's okay, and it's okay to not always say that, yeah, I'm proud, or to say that, yes, I'm okay with it, because you're only human, and it's okay
yeah.
to have those feelings as well. It's like nothing worse than feeling like you're expected to always be okay with it. It's okay to grieve for the life you thought you had, or the ability you're losing, or the fact that you can't do what your peers are doing, or just, yeah, it's okay to feel those things and to feel those emotions, and have those feelings about disability. It's okay to feel that way, and we don't always have to be as strong as we maybe portray to the outside world.
For sure. I like to think that during hardship, regardless of what it may be, if we can look back and notice a positive trait about ourselves, then ultimately we've learned something. And I was wondering for you, is there any time that you look back on that's been maybe hard for whatever reason, and you look back on that time and there's a particular trait that you're really proud of? What would it be for
Yeah,
you?
I think probably like perseverance, and
Hmm.
just I think, and as I said like at the beginning when we were started talking about how, when I before I was diagnosed, I would just give 110%, regardless of the fact that I
Mm.
couldn't really physically, do what
Yeah.
I wanted. I think that's always been how I am. I've always given that 110% regardless, and I think that probably would be my best kind of trait for the past and the future. That I do just kind of push through and keep going, and I guess kind of maybe like feel what I'm feeling in the moment, and then move on. So kind of let myself take a minute, kind of accept that, whatever it is happening is not great, or it's happening and I'm allowed to feel that
Mm.
way. But then pick myself up again and carry on. And I think also that using my kind of subconscious way of using the bad things for good, like the whole art school thing, then studying casualism, like without even realizing I was doing
Yeah.
it, I did it. And I think without sounding arrogant or anything like that, I think that's sort of another thing that I think is kind of like a trait that I look back, or kind of finding a solution to a problem without even thinking about it. Sort of think, okay, well, this is happening. This, isn't going to work, or this is happening, and there's no kind of cure for it. There's no way around it. So what can we do instead?
Mhm.
How can we move forward or move around it? So yeah, a mixture of things.
I love what you said about if we can't move it, how do we move around it? How do we move forward if there isn't going to be a change? Because, like, the vast majority of disabled people and, anybody who experiences any disability in their life really will understand that adaptation is your best friend. Like, regardless,
Absolutely.
adaptation will become your best friend. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, and
Yeah.
that's exactly what you exude, is that, okay, so there isn't a cure, but how do we move forward from this? Because there are still things that have to be done. Let's carry on. Let's move forward. And perseverance, I think, is a really brilliant trait to have, regardless of who you are and what you do, and what your disability is, or if you're even disabled or not. I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of merit to be had in perseverance, so I love that.
I think it's also really important to say that of course everyone deals with things differently, and that everyone's unique way of moving around something or finding a solution to something is also acceptable. It doesn't matter how you personally deal with something, whether it's disability or anything in life. I think there is no one way to deal with anything. There's no one way of disability, and therefore there's no one, kind of find your own way around things. If you feel like you cope with something better a certain way, or you feel like in education, if there's a better way for you, if school isn't working for you, then homeschooling or distance learning. There's
Yeah.
no correct, like I did that for a couple of years in my GCSEs because it wasn't working at school or wasn't getting the support I needed. So I left and distance learned my GCSEs from home myself. And I think that's also the thing, like it just doesn't matter how you get through it, as long as you kind of like find the way that suits you to do it, then that's fine. And that you mustn't
Mhm.
compare yourself to anybody else. I think it's always like very hard sometimes. Like I admit that there are people, social media influencers who are disabled, and sometimes I think, I can't do that, or how do they have the energy to do that? And that's okay also to kind of to feel that, but it's also good to know that like not everyone who's disabled can, and there are different levels, and everyone's got a different way of portraying disability, but also portraying kind of like how they cope with certain things, or yeah, or just kind of how you deal with life. Like, and that's fine as long as you do what works for you and don't try and do something because someone else does it. I think if that makes sense.
Yeah, it completely does. And it goes back to that original thing, is that disability is not one size fits all. It's so individual for every single person, regardless of whether or not you have the same diagnosis on a piece of paper, how you relate to your disability, how you adapt to the world around you, how you move, how you walk, how you talk. Everything is just so individual. And that's actually the beauty of disability, is that it's never the same thing. And
Yeah,
aren't we so lucky that we get to experience that?
definitely. I think also meeting, coming across other people with disabilities or health conditions, you could get to experience how they deal with things as well, and you get to experience
Hmm.
who they are because of their disability or who they are because of or despite of it. I think that's really it is beautiful that you kind of you get to experience that, not just from your own experience, but someone else's as well, which is really really special.
So, I like to ask about the weird questions we get surrounding our disabilities, because I think there is some humour in what questions you get asked. And I was wondering, is there a particular funny question or weird question that people ask you about your disability?
Um, Nothing like nothing too specific. There obviously have been occasions where I've had some funny things, like someone once asked me if I could drink alcohol with my disability, which I said, and I think sometimes people think, is it contagious, or especially like when
Mm,
we were children, like when I was younger with children, of kind of thinking that they could kind of get contaminated by it, even though it's completely not how it works at all. Lack of information and education. I think there's nothing like that specific. It's more just I think assumptions people make. Like for example, I use a mobility scooter, so I'm like partially ambulant. Go around. I
mm-hmm.
can't walk very far or stand for very long, but I can, get up and move. And actually
Yeah.
happened the other day. I went in on my mobility scooter and I stood up to just move to a shopping rail, and I'm like, oh, she can walk. And I'm just like, yeah, I never said I couldn't, you know. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you know. Um, and I think finding questions, I think it's kind of just people's assumptions about, they see one thing and they think that that's it, And I think that often, not so questions, but just people's, they see and they observe and then they kind of decide that that's how it is. And then you kind of do something that surprises them, like get up and walk. And they're like, oh my gosh, it's
Mm-hmm.
incredible. Or like at concerts or music festivals and you're sitting down and maybe you stand up and have a little dance. And they're just like shocked because that surprised their perception of you and they kind of think that you shouldn't because you're disabled, or that you shouldn't. If you're disabled, there's only one way of being disabled, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore you could have nobody who's disabled could walk at all. That kind of mentality and lack of awareness. But questions, I don't think I've had that many like direct questions. Like the thing about alcohol was quite funny and bizarre. But I think, yeah, nothing like direct. I think it's more people's assumption, or the questions that they don't actually ask you. I think it would actually be
Mm-hmm.
incredible to find out the questions people think in their heads, but don't ask you for whatever reason. I think that would be a very interesting social experiment.
I think you're right. I think that would be an incredible social experiment. But then part of me really wonders if it would be like ethically safe.
True, yeah, true. Probably best we don't know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I only have one final question for you, Laura. And I just want to say before I ask it, I already know the answer to the question. You've already answered this question, but I have loved having you on today because I think you really embody turning negatives into positives, and having a really, you know, the perspective that you have on life is very much let's move around the problems that we've got, and how do we move forward. And I think there's so much for that, and I think it's so brilliant, and I just want to say thank you for being on. But my final question is, Laura, are you disabled and proud?
Yes, I am. I am disabled and proud. And I think that it's, as I said earlier, it comes with the fact of having that explanation of why. And also I think that I often think like who would I be without my disability? If I wasn't disabled, who would I be? What would I be like? How would I think about the world? How would I like kind of morally who would I be? And I think that's I'm not my disability and my disability isn't who I am, but it is a huge part of me and a huge part of like how I am as a person. It kind of shaped that. I think any experience that one has, I think that does shape you whether you know it does or not. So I think that that is also a big thing of kind of it's my identity isn't just someone who's disabled. It's far more than that. But at the same time, it is I am who I am because of it, because of what I lived through. And I think that that's kind of quite special in a way because it makes me have a different perspective on the world. And what was I going to say? But I think it's really also good to say that there obviously are times when maybe I don't feel as proud or I don't feel as I guess accepting of it. I think that's really like there's nothing wrong with saying that. I think it's really important to say that because I know there are people out there who maybe aren't as proud or aren't as open to disclosing it or who don't feel like they can be or even allowed to be disabled if people around them are saying, you know, actually you're not disabled or you haven't got a health condition. That's a lot of submissions we get about people whose people around them don't like kind of let them say I'm autistic or I have ADHD or something. So that's also really important to say that you don't have to always be proud, even though obviously I am. And obviously we're different always going to be in the future. There's always going to be situations that make me feel a certain way or make me feel maybe less ready to disclose it. There are certain areas of life where, you know, I think probably you can understand as well. There's times when you could have, if you're aware of how someone's going to react, whether that's with dating or with work or any sort of aspect of life, especially growing up and in the adult world, there are those times you're kind of thinking you have to kind of take a step back and think, do I disclose this immediately? Do I say I'm disabled or do I just like wait a bit, if that makes sense as well? So I think, yes, I am proud, but there are also more and more there are moments where I think kind of I think also because now I'm older I know how the world works more and so I'm very aware of how people perceive disability and how people react to disability and how they misconceptions that they have. So maybe that makes me more wary of disclosing it, but it's more I guess for their sake or for how they're I think also like to protect myself from their reaction, if that makes sense. So kind of preempting that maybe in that situation there could be some resistance or there could be some judgment without knowing who I am underneath the disability, that I'm kind of maybe more reticent, I guess, to protect myself and to protect myself from those comments or situations that I know probably will happen.
I think everything that you said makes so much sense, and
Good.
you're right. You don't always have to be proud. Some days it's one of the worst things in the world, but then on other days it's the best, and it's very much swings and roundabouts. But thank you so much for being a guest today. I have loved this conversation, and
Me
I
too.
just can't wait to see what you do this year. I think it's going to be an amazing year for all of us.
Thank you.
Like, aren't we so lucky that we get to do this? Like, I love these conversations. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and I love the podcast, so I'm a big fan. So it's a real honour to be a guest and to be on.